Okay, here we go for the adult Bible study for August the 3rd, 2014. We're still in the book of Philippians. We're going to be right here looking at chapter 1, verses 19 through 26, this section on living for Christ. That's what we'll be covering in the sermon series this morning as well. Title of the Bible study is this: Having a kingdom mindset means redeeming the ordinary while living for the eternal. And so we're going to be looking at some things that I can't cover in the sermon today that I think are important for us as Christians to talk about. A lot of it is just talking about normal things and why normal things matter. And so there's our text here, beginning in the last part of verse 18 down to verse 26. Context that tells you what's going on. Here's our goal today. Paul viewed his life as only existing for the purposes of God's kingdom. Once those purposes were completed, so was his life. His present condition, confidence in our text, is because he was convinced that he had not yet run his course and completed his purposes. That's a true kingdom mindset. In our lives, now here's how we're going to connect this. In our lives, we are often faced with the conflict of the ordinary versus the extraordinary. A truly kingdom mindset will see no conflict between the two, but see how each can be used for the singular purpose. That's what we're looking at. We're trying to look at life through the singular purpose of exalting Christ. Every circumstance in life, church things, home things, work things, leisure things, everything being used for the one singular purpose of glorifying the Lord Jesus Christ. So we're just going to look at two key points, two marks that highlight that. There were more that I could say, but I really wanted to hit on these two, especially this first one. And I'm going to have to walk you through this to explain where I'm coming from, because writing it out, it's kind of hard to express what I was thinking through when writing this. Before we get started, a lot of this is going to seem like it's a critique against the radical movement and Pastor David Platt. It's not so much a critique, because I appreciate the radical movement. I appreciate David Platt. Big fan of his. I think he's a good preacher, a good writer, and y'all know that. But I think it's the other side of that coin that we also need to talk about. Yes, we need to talk about the radical aspect of Christianity, but the other side of that coin is we also need to talk about the ordinary aspect of Christianity. The reality is that most of us will not relocate and are not called to relocate to another country like the Ricketts did this past week, leaving and moving. Most of us will live an ordinary life and have an ordinary job and have an ordinary house, and what sometimes that radical will do is make us think that doesn't matter. Right, that doing those things don't matter. What really matters is if we're willing to drop it all and move to India. And I don't know that that's the case, and I don't think that's what Platt is intending, but I think that's what some people misinterpret Platt and get from it. And so this is the other side of that coin, and especially this first point here. Mark number one is this: when you have a kingdom mindset, everything becomes important. Not just a few things, not just spiritual things, and not just radical things, and not just those things, but everything is important. We see in verse 18, 19, and 20 here, Paul's expressing what's going on in his life. He's thankful for their prayers. He's confident their prayers will work out for his deliverance. We explains a little bit of what that deliverance he's talking about there. Is it spiritual deliverance and death and to be with Christ, or is it actual physical deliverance from prison? There's theologians differing on that. But look at his goal. He says he's confident of this. His full courage now is that Christ will be honored. See, he has a singular purpose. And so because he has that singular purpose, living and dying are both valuable. Whatever happens is valuable because of the singular purpose, and that's what we're driving at. Okay, so here's what's going on here. I want to kind of get an idea of what's going on, so you kind of get an idea of Paul's intention in writing that passage there. What does it mean for us? Well, having a kingdom mindset means that we view everything we do through the lens of glorifying God and esteeming the gospel. Paul clearly viewed not only his imprisonment, but every circumstance of his life through one important question: is Christ being glorified? And that's the question that you ask yourself, and we ask ourselves: is Christ being glorified in our lives? And the answer to that question is yes. Then whatever you're doing is okay. Okay? We talk a lot about being in the exact center of God's will. Well, do we see that expressed in the scriptures a lot? Or can we just say, can Christ be glorified in this? And just do that thing. Okay? Well, for us, this means that what we that we are to see value in anything that we do that results in Christ being glorified. Paul was satisfied in life or death as long as Christ was glorified. It didn't matter as long as Jesus is glorified. This means that he can be glorified in both, by implication. In fact, in another letter, Paul affirms that Christ can be glorified in any number of things a biblical Christian puts their hands to, if done in the proper heart and mind. See that in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 31. Whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do all to the glory of God. Listen, whatever you do, man, whether you're eating a meal, whether you're drinking a drink, whether you're hanging out with friends, or whether you're going on a mission trip or you're locked in prison, you can be glorifying to God. And so we need to put forth that, leisure as just as important and valuable as maybe organized worship. And that doesn't jive with us sometimes because we don't see the value in all of life. Work is just as important as a mission trip. That sometimes doesn't jive with us and doesn't sit well with our minds. Well, Paul saw everything as valuable because he saw Christ as Lord of everything. Now, this is at odds with the common misconception amongst many Christians that only things with eternal significance, and note I said this, eternal significance in their own estimation. It's funny how we determine what is eternally significant and all. Whereas Paul's talking about here that eating and drinking is eternally significant. Okay, we only think maybe a mission trip is. So we need to rethink what it means to be a Christian living their Christian life. This evidences itself in a form of legalism that says that leisure or work are somehow not as godly as an activity or as an activity as a religious function. Ordinary Christianity then becomes demeaned and subjected to more radical or emotional examples of the faith. Now, I've included an example here, and it's an extravagant example that kind of pinpoints the problem here. And I'll give you the setup. If you don't know the situation with Aragon Kenner, he is an SBC college president in the state of Georgia. He came on the scene. He bursted on the scene after September the 11th, 2001, because he had this dramatic testimony of being a jihadi radical who had come to Christ. He told the story of how he had was raised in a madrasa, learning how to attack and kill Christians, and he was going to be a terrorist, and Christ saved him. And this was a very dramatic testimony, and it was very needed at the time. After September 11th, people didn't understand Islam. They were freaking out about Muslims, and they wanted an example inherently that the gospel is bigger and we can handle this, and we will survive when we need to get the gospel. And so pops onto the scene as this guy who has this background. It's like, wow, look, he's the example. He's the example. Listen to this dramatic testimony. Well, sadly, it came out that he lied about all of it. He made most of it up for the most part. He, instead of coming as a teenager with his father and training as a teenager to be a Muslim radical, he actually moved to America when he was 3 and grew up as a normal teenager in America, a normal secular kid with divorced parents who just lived a normal life, and he was converted as a teenager. A normal conversion, a normal life. What's sad is it seemed that he needed to create an extraordinary testimony because a normal testimony just didn't seem awesome enough. And so that's why I put that in here. And I put a quote from him that he recently preached at First Baptist Church Woodstock. It astounds me that Johnny Hunt would let the guy there, knowing what all he's done, but whatever, Johnny Hunt ain't perfect. Johnny Hunt is a man, and he's sinful just like the rest of us. And so I put this quote here: average Christianity never changed anybody. And I put that there because that did not jive with me at all. It doesn't jive with me because I don't like that. Because it's quotes like that, as we see here in this quote, that lead you to want to come up with something extraordinary. Man, average Christianity does change people. Average Christianity would be me going home at the end of my day and going and playing with my kids and walking with my wife in our neighborhood and just spending time together. That's average Christianity, and that has eternal significance. And so I just really struggle with the mindset in our culture that we have to look for the more extravagant and the more bigger and the more radical and the more awesome at the expense of just being a normal Christian who goes to church and works his job and lives in his house and stays in his community and is just faithful in all these things. And so, why does all this matter? Because everything matters. Eating matters, drinking matters, sleeping matters, rest matters, parenting matters. It all matters. All of life has value. All of life can be lived for this one singular purpose of glorifying Christ. Now, this note here, I've included an article from Michael Horton. He's a theologian at Westminster Seminary in California, and it's an article I read recently that really helped me think through some of these things. And this is here for your benefit as the teacher. Read this. You do not quote this verbatim. Pull out maybe some key points you want to talk about. But this really is a helpful thing to convey what I'm trying to talk about. Normal Christianity is matter. It is valuable. We need to see the value in it. Paul saw value in eating and drinking, living and dying. Everything mattered. Yet sometimes if you look at American Christianity, the only thing that matters is if we're doing anything exciting. Well, that's usually just to thrill us. It ain't to serve God. And so read that. Let that kind of sit with you, kind of build a framework for you as you think through how to handle this passage in this section. I got some questions down here. Was Paul more godly in prison than when he wasn't? Well, of course not, but why? Are we more godly when we're doing something radical rather than when we're doing something ordinary? Say, am I more godly, am I more Christ-like going on a mission trip to Honduras and feeding the poor, or hanging out at my house and inviting some guys from church and just grilling hot dogs? Which is more Christ-like? Well, I can tell you what sounds more Christ-like, but is that the case? So ask them that. How does a kingdom mindset make ordinary things in our lives valuable? Number 4, what is the danger of esteeming the extraordinary at the expense of the ordinary? Well, we saw in the example of Ergen Kenner that one of the dangers is we feel the need to basically indulge and basically to lie, to create something that's not true, to impress the ever-increasing and ever insatiable desire for the appetite of the American Christian to want something more extravagant and more glorious and more wonderful. Just being a normal guy who converted as a teenager wasn't enough to get Ergen Kenner on the stage at the largest churches. He needed to create something dramatic. And that's dangerous. It's sad that we live in such a world that we chase after the dramatic like that. Number 5, do you think American Christianity is preconditioned by our culture to esteem the extravagant and dismiss the ordinary? Why and how can we change this? Okay. Mark number 2. When you have a kingdom mindset, the things of God become more desirable than the things of earth. Verses 21 through 23. Now, this explains what's going on, so I just want to drop down here and explain that this whole section seems like it's going to be a contradiction to what I just said, but it's not. Even though the ordinary matters, as we saw above, it matters because it can be used and is designed to be used for the purpose of esteeming the eternal. That's why it matters, and that's why the extraordinary, that's why everything matters, is because they're meant to esteem the things of God. The temporal exists to give weight and value to the eternal. For example, marriage relationships matter because they all in some way point to the one who designed relationship and his triune nature, where God as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit always lives in relationship, and so relationship matters. So ordinary relationships matter. Ordinary marriages matter because they point to the one who designed marriage, and they point to the one who is always in relationship. When we have a kingdom mindset, we desire the things of God more than we do the things of the world. As Paul genuinely desired to depart and be with Christ, and notice this, without entertaining some morbid death wish, we don't do that. A kingdom mindset will actually desire union with Christ and the city which is to come. You read that quote, Hebrews chapter 13, verses 12 through 14, where we don't have a lasting city here. We're seeking the city which is to come. Now here's some questions, and let them think through this, and you think through this, because this sounds very contradictory. How does this section not contradict? How does it relate to the previous section? It's not a contradiction to give value to the mundane while at the same time living for the eternal. But why is it not a contradiction? Okay, think through that. Let the classmates do some critical thinking on that as well. Number 2, how does viewing death as far better because we get to be with Christ mean that we should want to die? It doesn't me, I promise you that, but why not? Why should Christians not have a martyr complex? In the early church, there were those who had a martyr complex. Man, they really, They really wanted to die for the Christ to prove that. That can be selfish. Why can that be selfish? Why is viewing death as far better because we get to be with Christ still mean that I don't want to die? Number 3, where is the balance between enjoying the things of this world while still living for the glory of another? There's a balance to be had. Where is that balance? And then number 4, well, then how can you practically put that balance into practice in Russellville, Alabama, in your daily life? You're going to work tomorrow. Your class members, they're going to be going to work tomorrow. Maybe they're a stay-at-home mom and they're going back to changing diapers. And man, the mundane Mondays. Well, how can mundane Mondays be? How could this view of the eternal be put in practice on a mundane Monday in Russellville, Alabama? All right, here's a conclusion. When we have a kingdom mindset, we will give value to the mundane and ordinary while still living for the eternal. We will be comfortable serving on a mission trip in Thailand or serving our spouse by washing the dishes. We will see value in everything, in all of life, because life itself is to be used for God's glory. When we do so, we esteem the city which is to come above the city that is now our home. And I've included a final note here. If you want more, read some more articles from some better preachers and better writers than me, check out the August 2014 edition of Table Talk Magazine. It's available here. You won't get all the articles, but you'll get some excerpts that may help you think through the value of the ordinary. Once again, if you have any questions, please feel free to call me, text me, pull me aside. I'll come by and help explain my thought process in writing this. Thanks.